On behalf of MyTech, I want to welcome everybody to the Glass Lab talk today. We're thrilled to have Peter Houk here from the Glass Lab, our Artistic Director of the Glass Lab, who will talk a little bit about the history of the Glass Lab, how the students learn glass blowing, and also some of the cross-disciplinary projects that the Glass Lab has done over the years. This isn't our usual format, of course. Usually we're in the Glass Lab watching all of this live in person, but it's going to be an amazing talk, and enjoy the beauty and the magic, which is the Glass Lab. Peter?
Thanks, Diane. And can everyone hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. I have not given a Zoom talk yet. I've been on Zoom a lot, but I haven't given a Zoom talk. So this is my maiden voyage that way. But thanks to the MyTech people, I feel really well taken care of by this great crew we have. Yeah, I wasn't sure how it worked, but man, we got a lot of people here taking care of business. So thanks for that. And one of our crew has been in the Glass Lab Foofy since I think her entire undergraduate career. So that's kind of a bonus too. So I think I wanted to start off before I show any slides or video, just by saying that I'm very excited about this talk because, as Diane said, usually what we do is we do live glass blowing demos for MyTech, and we have for the entire, Diane, you may remember how many years we've been doing this, but I think it's been many. And it's always more or less the same format. We get as many people in the room as we can. It's like 10 or 15, and then we do a little bit of talking, 5 minutes worth, and then a live glass blowing demo that usually goes over an hour and people have to leave. This is the first time I've been able to do a MyTech talk that talks about all the other things that we do in the program. All the student experience and the work that people make and the projects that have been generated out of the Glass Lab. I've never talked about that to this group. So that's fun. This is based on a talk that I have given to some alumni off campus a few times, and I went back and kind of rejiggered the talk a little bit for what I conceive of the MyTech audience to be. So yeah, and Diane also said the structure of the talk is I will start off talking a little bit about the history of the program because it's interesting, and the lab is older than most people realize. And then I'm going to talk about what the program is and how it works and some of the various features of the program. And then I want to show you 3 different projects that were born in the Glass Lab and went off to other departments or stayed in the lab, but that were generated by interesting student and faculty ideas. So that's how we're going to do this. So how do we get to the first slide now? Do I need to, let's see.
You'll need to reshare your screen, but you can get to the first slide before you do that.
Okay, let's see. I think first I need to exit the full screen. And then, uh-oh, what did I do?
For anybody that's joining us late, if you do have any questions for Peter during the presentation, feel free to drop them in chat and we'll read them off to Peter.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes, excellent.
Okay. All right, so we'll start from the beginning, which is MIT's motto, mens et manus. So, you know, ever since the Institute has been an institute, its motto has stated that mind and hand go together, and that concept and hands-on activity are forever welded together. And that is really the raison d'etre of the Glass Lab. It's always been the case, and it's certainly the reason that the Glass Lab got started. So way back in the day, MIT students, part of an MIT student's experience was always making the apparatus that you would use for the experiments that you wanted to conduct. And that's sort of the most obvious historical link to Mens et Manus, but in the almost 30 years that I have been at MIT, I've come to understand that there's a much deeper kind of foundational cognitive reciprocity between mind and hand that I did not fully appreciate for a very long time. And it's encapsulated in this little quote that I want to read that one of our students wrote, a very good writer, very good thinker, very good engineer, Kalin Becker, who is still with us as an instructor, having graduated in MEC-E in, I think, 2011 or so. And she wrote, "Playing with the complex dynamic behavior of glass has helped me internalize the concepts presented in my mechanics of materials, design and manufacturing, and thermal fluids classes. I have used glass to build a physical intuition of these concepts to become a better engineer, and I have used the same concepts to become a better glass blower." So I just think that's a beautiful way of summarizing her glass lab experience. So let's see, how can I get to the next slide? Yeah, so that's our version of the seal, done by Rachel Botzer, another MEC-E student. MEC-E students are good with their hands. We get a lot of them. And this was a seal, interpretation of the seal that was made by Rachel that we put on a t-shirt for the Great Glass Pumpkin Patch. Oh, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years ago, I think. So does anyone recognize this person? I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the lab. I know I can't hear back from people right now, but I'll give a couple of hints just because it's fun. This person is still at MIT. The picture is about 50 years old, 45 years old to 50 years old. This person's still at MIT, still very involved with hands-on learning at MIT, and director of the Edgerton Center. It's Kim Vandiver. Kim built the first glass furnace at MIT in about 1970, so we're talking 50 years ago now. And something I didn't know about Kim for a really long time is that he grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and is related to Dale Chihuly. And he and Dale built a furnace together somewhere in Tacoma, way back in probably the late 60s. Kim came to MIT, met a guy named Dave Kingery, who owned a lab in DMSE in course 3. Kim was in course 2, and he asked Dave Kingery if he could build a glass furnace in his lab. And, you know, this is so MIT. Dave Kingery said, okay, go ahead. You know, why not? So they built this glass furnace. This picture, I'm really lucky in that Kim has a lot of images that go way back from when he and his then wife Pam were running the program in 1972, 3, 4, 5 until about almost 1980. So this is what the room looked like. This is what the facility looked like in 1980. It's the scariest furnace I've ever seen in my life. You could just see that the burner there is just hanging by a thread, and it's just a pile of bricks with flames shooting out everywhere. But what a great picture. Let's see, having problems advancing to the next slide.
Are you able to just click on it?
Yeah, I just clicked it. Yeah, just for contrast, this is our furnace now. So you go back and you look at that and compare it with that, and we've come a long way. Yeah, this is a furnace with active closed loop flame control. It's not going to fall apart. It's a much better furnace. So these again are some historical pictures of the things that the students were making back in the 1970s, and you can see that it was a new course, student work from the new course 3095. So the classes then were part of the curriculum, part of DMSE. We're still part of DMSE, but back then they were part of the academic curriculum. And the class had kind of an archaeological orientation in a lot of ways. So students were learning some techniques of glass blowing, but technical glass blowing was very de-emphasized. It was, you can see the approach was much more about trying to understand materials history and the chemistry of color and so on and so forth. And so that was, I think that was great in a way. Students really got to understand why does cobalt make blue and chromium make green, and et cetera, et cetera. The problem by today's standards is that we can't make our own glasses anymore. Those students were handling elemental heavy metals. They were chromium oxides and cadmium oxides and lead and things that I actually found in barrels down in a closet a long time ago. And EHS would not be interested in that approach anymore. So we don't quite do things that way anymore. So at night, I'm going pretty fast forwarding here to about 1986, when this is Professor Michael Sema first came as a grad student onto the faculty of MIT. And Michael was, he was then specializing, a chemist specializing in ceramics, and was given, among other spaces, Dave Kingery's lab in room 4003, where we are now. And Michael walked in to the room, his first or second day, whatever, and he saw that furnace. And he's told me this story a bunch of times. He was just horrified at that furnace. And his immediate thought was, I got to turn that thing off right now before somebody gets hurt. But also in the room at that time was Paige Hazelgrove, an artist who had somehow infiltrated MIT and was working in the lab. And she got talking with Michael, and eventually, pretty quickly, Michael understood that this represented a unique opportunity, teaching opportunity at MIT. So rather than shut off the furnace and kill the program, Michael came up with an idea to kind of reinvent the program. So you can see there on the left, 1972, the lab that's got all this other equipment in it besides glass blowing stuff, and just one or two people, one person watching while another person works. And Michael decided to really fundamentally change the orientation of the program from a class that was only open to material science students to a class that would be open to everybody at the Institute. There were 2 or 3 brilliant ideas that he had about how to transform this program. And one of them was to open up the classes to everyone at the university, so that students in every department could take the class, and staff and faculty are also able to take this class. So that really transformed the program into a much more cross-disciplinary community. So that was one of the brilliant ideas. Also at that time, during MIT's history, there was this recognition culturally on campus that students were too involved in kind of individual learning, and MIT students weren't very good at working in teams, and that this was affecting not only their experience, but America's ability to compete globally in a world economy. And so MIT was looking for ways of kind of culturally educating students on how to work together in teams, in research teams, as scientists and engineers. And Michael's idea, and Sam Allen, who he partnered with on this, was that let's create an activity or a couple of activities, because the Forge and Foundry were included in this, where students have to work together. They have to learn to communicate together and plan ahead and improvise when things go off the rails. And so that became the new sort of focus of the Glass Lab, was teaching glass blowing skills, but more importantly, teaching teamwork. You know, how to communicate your plan to a team, how to improvise when things don't go as planned, how to be an assistant and listen on a team and track the piece and watch what's going on. All kinds of skills that are very transferable to working in teams with engineers and scientists. So yeah, so that's what the program became in 1986. And this is a picture of a typical pumpkin crew. So one of the super team-oriented things that we've been doing, in addition to doing it because we need to raise money to run the program, is this great glass pumpkin patch. We've been doing this since 2001. And so we've been almost 20 years now in doing the glass pumpkin patch. So it's a quintessential team activity. There's a gaffer. You can see the person sitting at the bench here. That's Mike Stern. And he's got 2 assistants, well, 3 assistants. So Caitlin's behind the bench doing something, I'm not sure, but then these 2 assistants are heating things, and it becomes very production-oriented, extremely team-oriented. This is kind of based on the Venetian way of blowing glass that's centuries and centuries old. Every great glass blowing tradition has its way of working, and the Venetians are very big on teamwork. So their teams usually have 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 people if they're working on big chandelier parts and things like that. So I would say that our way of teaching is kind of derived from the Italian ways of blowing glass and of the Italian culture of blowing glass. So this is a slide of how our classes work. So the program is really oriented toward classes. We do some other things, but the heart of the program are the classes. So we have beginning classes and intermediate and 1 advanced class. So between those different skill levels, we have about 50 students now. Since the renovation in 2015, we've been able to expand, and we have about 50 students in any given semester. And our classes are taught all year long, well, all school year long. So we have a fall class and a spring class and then an IAP class also. And all of those levels are going during that entire time. So this is an image of a beginner class watching a demo. So the person at the bench, Amy Nichols, is doing a demo, probably showing students how to make a cup or something like that. And then students watch, and then they do. So every single class starts off with a demo and a talk, so sometimes on a whiteboard about the concepts involved, and then the students spend the rest of the time making things based on what they saw in the demo. So this is pretty typical of beginning student work. So you'll see some in the center, there's some paperweights, these solid nodule things, and some cups around, and a couple of rudimentary looking bowls. So students emerge from the beginning glass blowing class having learned how to make a variety of fairly simple objects, starting with the solid paperweight things, and then moving into vessels which are made on the blowpipe, like cups and bowls. And you can see that color, we start using color, some of the oxides that we no longer handle, but buy from other manufacturers. So that's pretty typical of student work. I'm going to show you some slides from a show that we had a few years at the Sandwich Glass Museum in 2018. We were invited to curate and put together a show down there about the glass lab. So I decided with another instructor, Michelle Trammell, that we should feature the work of people who've been involved in the lab for a pretty long time who are instructors. So this all represents kind of intermediate and more advanced work. And it's interesting to me because you get to see work that is technically more accomplished, but also work that conceptually begins to become more accomplished and more integrated into the intellectual pursuits of MIT students. So this is a piece of Whitney Cornforth's. He was an ocean engineer, very attentive to coral structures and things that he spent a lot of time looking at. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell. This is supposed to be a glass version, greatly magnified, of a slide with red blood cells. And this is Steve Wasserman, who works in biological engineering as a staff teacher. Helen Lee made this piece. She is now running the glass program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She majored in architecture at MIT and is very interested in language, the relationship between objects and language. So these are all bubbles that she blew and then cut in half. So the section represents a letter, and then she puts these letters together into sentences. Paperweights. made by Mike Stern that have 2 pennies in them each. One is a copper penny and one is a post-copper penny with, I think, zinc that has a much lower, or aluminum maybe, has a much lower melting temperature. So the lower penny in the paperweight is the one that has exploded in the glass, and the upper floating one is the copper one that has just begun to soften but can't get hot enough to completely disintegrate. Very, very MIT. And he's written up even a special little explanation of what these things are, and he came up with this idea. This is work of Marty and Erik Demaine, who are both in CSAIL. You may know about Erik because he's an origami guy and a math whiz as well, and teaches a lot of classes on things like algorithms in CSAIL. Both of he and Marty are glass artists, paper artists, but they both work in glass. So these are kind of ship in a bottle pieces of folded things that they made and then put into glass pieces that they also made. Here's a collaborative rocket ship by Kalin Becker and Olivia Chow, the Rainbow Rocket. And I wanted to show you a piece that I made that was also in the show, just so you know, I don't just run the program, I'm also an artist. I have an off-campus studio in Cambridge up on Sherman Street in North Cambridge. And this was a piece that, I've got a little video of it. This was a piece that is a projection, kind of a light device. The piece of glass, a sphere of glass about 1 foot in diameter behind a projection screen made of opacified or translucent glass with 2 LED light sources shining through while the piece very, very slowly rotates on a turntable. So you get to see the light bending around where the color is obscuring and casting reflections onto the front of the screen. So the title of the piece is Ecliptic. I made it around the time of the last solar eclipse and was inspired by that. We'll take a little meditative break here and watch this. There's just a few more seconds. Right. So I want to talk about a couple of other projects that were sort of features of the program. We like to have visiting artists come a lot. So when I get tuned into somebody who's either a scientist or an artist, or even better, somebody who's both, we'll often invite them to MIT to do something. So this was our most recent one last year. Jane Cook, who used to be a research scientist at Corning for a long time, was chief research scientist at Corning. Very important job at Corning. And then finally got tired of being a research scientist at Corning and decided to go over to the Corning Museum and be the director of special programs there, of new materials programs there, and now is in Pittsburgh teaching at, I believe it's UPenn, which has a very, very good glass program. So Jane came, and this was a wonderful, wonderful workshop where Jane, who is a very, very sophisticated scientist with one of the deepest understandings of glass that I have ever seen, invited us to break the rules around how we understood glass. So there were 2 days of workshops with materials and lectures, talked about metals, ceramics, and glass and the relationship between them and what makes each different from one another. And there's a lot of rules in glass blowing, and one of them is you don't combine glass with other things. You don't combine glass with metal, and you don't combine glass with ceramics because they won't fit. They won't be compatible, and they'll end up breaking, and you'll just be frustrated. But it turns out those rules don't always apply. So Jane sort of made us just back up, have sort of a beginner's mind, and say, just play and see what happens. So these are some of the examples of what came out of the sandbox, with somebody having blown a bubble into a screen mesh, and the screen mesh partially melted into the bubble, and there was no cracking. And the right-hand image there is of, I think that hot bubble of glass got dipped in ceramic slip and then blown out, and the slip stuck to the glass, and it's a beautiful pattern. Again, no problems with compatibility or stress, particularly. This is Daniel Clayman, who's taught a couple of great workshops in kiln casting. So we don't just do glass blowing all the time. We do other things too, kiln-based projects as well. So Dan is a real master of lost wax casting. And then Mariana Linz in the yellow there was one of our students, and she was in the EAPS program here at MIT, very interested in fusing glass. And she taught a workshop in fused glass maybe 3 or 4 years ago, one of our own students. And these were some of the results from that workshop. So these are, you're looking at flat glass panels with other cut pieces of flat glass that have been put in a kiln that is raised to a temperature that gets hot enough that all the glass fuses together into a single sheet. So then I want to talk a little bit about our visiting artist program. So we have, like I said, we have people that come and do workshops, but we also have this annual lecture to commemorate Paige Hazelgrove, who died in 1997. And ever since then, we have had a lecture in her honor. We try to choose somebody who is either very well established and has an international reputation like Dale Chihuly, or somebody that people don't really know about who's an up-and-coming, very promising young glass artist. So we have had people like Dale Chihuly, and Maya Lin gave the lecture in 2010. Sometimes these people come because of other things that they have going on, coincidental projects in the Boston area. So when Dale Chihuly came, he came just before his big blockbuster show at the Museum of Fine Arts about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. And Maya Lin came right as the building, I think it's the Novartis campus, was being completed, one of those buildings was designed by Maya Lin. Larry Bell, the famous minimalist artist, came and gave a talk, and then I learned from Jane Farver, who used to run the list, that Larry Bell constructed this piece that you see here for MIT. It was commissioned by Vera List in about 1975, I think. And it was first assembled in Lobby 13. It's called the Iceberg and its Shadow. It's an enormous piece consisting of 50-some pieces of glass. And it was only assembled in its full iteration one time in Lobby 13. And then it was sent over to the museum where it was in storage, and I think it got shipped to some other places where it was partially installed in different countries and things, but it's still in MIT's collection in boxes somewhere. So we had Larry come and give a talk also. Spencer Finch gave a talk a couple of years ago. He does not really have an MIT connection, but I happened to run into him in Barcelona at the Mies van der Rohe Pavilion, got talking with him and asked him if he would do the lecture. And it was spectacular, spectacular lecture. And then last year was the first year one of our own alumna, Helen Lee, gave the talk. Helen went through architecture, graduated in about 2000, and is now running the glass program in the art department at Madison, Wisconsin, at University of Wisconsin. And then there's the great Lino Tagliapietra, the Venetian glass master, who was a teacher of mine back in about 2000. And I asked Lino, I knew that Lino would not be that interested in working in our glass studio because he can work in any studio in the world he wants to work in. But I thought, well, maybe he'll want to come and give a talk. So I asked him, Maestro, would you be willing to come to MIT and give a talk? He said, sure, I come. So Lino came, gave a great talk, came down, visited the glass lab, and he showed enough interest in the glass lab that I had a feeling he might want to come back and work in the lab. So we asked Lino if he would come back, and he did. For 5 years, Lino brought his team every year Lino and his team of 4 or 5 other people based in Seattle came to MIT partly because they love MIT and partly because they had a hot shop where they could do anything they wanted to do. So we had a wonderful time working with Lino. And most of the time when Lino blows, he's working in this design vocabulary of this tradition that is called cane work. So cane work, here is some cane being pulled. Cane work is based on the property that glass has of being able to be extruded and keep its shape, keep its cylindrical sectional shape while being extruded. So it's hot enough to be able to pull into a thread, but it's cold enough on the outside that the shape is constrained and stays cylindrical in shape. And because of that physical property, you can do all kinds of things with these glass canes. So this is a pile of glass canes that Lino made. And then the canes get aggregated together to make pieces like this. So if you take a bunch of canes and you line them up and fuse them together and blow them into a sculptural vessel, you can end up with work like this. So it's based on Venetian and even before that Roman sort of design vocabulary that's been around at least since the Renaissance. This way of working in cane, this particular way of working in cane of extruding glass, lining it up, picking it up, and blowing it into vessels has been around for 400 or 500 years. So Lino is working within this design tradition that has been very, very well worked over, but still offers a lot of new possibilities. So the magic happened when Lino met Erik Demaine from Seasail. Erik is a glassblower and his father was a glassblower. Erik came down and started hanging around with Lino and asking him questions. And one of the questions he asked was, "Hey Lino, do you think in all the time that Italians have been working with cane, do you think there are still any new cane designs out there, any new geometric possibilities?" And without hesitating, Lino said, "Oh, without a doubt, there definitely are." So that inspired a collaboration that led to this project that I want to talk about called Virtual Glass. So Erik and Marty got really interested in whether they could make a software program you could use as a glassblower to model cane designs so you could understand the limitations of the geometry of working with cane and try out ideas virtually instead of having to walk into the hot shop and turn on the furnace and go through all the time and expense of doing that. So we started off with Lino making drawings of canes that he wasn't sure could be made and showing them to Marty and Erik starting to build from the ground up a software modeling program. So you can see on the right-hand screen there is one of the canes that Lino wanted to see modeled, but he couldn't really draw it. So after a certain amount of playing around with canes, starting to understand the design space a little bit, and a few years of work and a few graduate student theses, this program emerged called Virtual Glass. And the way it works is you have a color library. This first slide shows you analogs for a lot of the colors that are available through manufacturers in Germany, transparent colors and opaque colors. So you build a library of colors. On the left-hand side, there's a gold color and a very dark red color. And you build those in cane form. So you make these kind of cylinders of colored glass. And then you can vary the amount of clear glass that will be surrounding that as though you had gone back into the furnace and gotten a layer of clear glass over your color. Then you can aggregate or you can gang those canes together. Here they alternate between red and yellow, or red and gold. And the right-hand part of the program shows you what the cane looks like from the side. So you're looking at the section of the cane in the middle and the cane from the side on the right-hand side. And you can see in the middle, okay, can you see my cursor? moving around?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So you can see that there's a function here so that you can control the casing, you can control the shape, and you can also twist the cane on the right-hand side, and you can just multiply the canes, subtract or add canes depending on the row count of canes. So it's very easy. It's a very versatile program. So this is what the cane looks like twisted at almost 50% twisted. Or that might actually be 50 twists per something. I'm not sure what that is. But you have the ability to twist your cane to see what would it look like. And then after you've made your new colors, you've made some canes, you can then put the canes together and choose a shape from the shape library and see what those canes would look like mapped onto that shape. So it's a pretty thoroughgoing program when it comes to seeing what the cane will look like, not just as cane, but mapped onto different shapes. And this is so you can rotate the shape. So there's the bowl kind of from a equatorial perspective and then looking down on it. And then we started wanting to use a way that you could customize, do things that are not so off-center. So this, might be a little bit hard to understand, but this represents 3 bundles of canes that have been mushed together in a non-centered sort of a way in section. And then what does that look like when it's extruded and twisted? And it's kind of a ropey looking cane, which we went on to do. This gave us an idea, and we had not seen this kind of cane before. So having seen what it could look like, we went into the hot shop, made it happen, and these are 3 bowls that we actually blew using this kind of idea that was generated from the software. So it's a really powerful program, and what I've learned using it myself is that it's not just good for visualizing something that you think you might be able to see already, sort of, but for thinking about the boundaries of what's possible and not possible in cane. It kind of forces you to start over at the very beginning and sort of ask yourself, what is cane? So I think we're going to, another great byproduct of this of many visits of Lino was a video that Marty and Erik made about Lino, a sort of portrait of Lino called Lino Tagliapietra, Glass Magician. And I want you guys to see that video because it's just so much fun. So this is just a close-up of some of the cane that we made, having modeled. And then, Anthony, I think it's your turn to put the video on.
Excellent. That was a wonderful video, and we have a question for you.
Sure.
Christine Maglio says, my 8-year-old daughter wants to know how long it takes to make one of those vessels with all the glass canes inside.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
A lot of times when we're asked that question, we'll say, well, it takes about an hour and 20 years. So, it takes at least 20 years to get good enough that you can do some of these kinds of things at the level that Lino is working. And then usually it's a multi-stage operation. So one day you'll come in and you'll make all the cane. So you'll get together with an assistant and you'll spend several hours heating up color and pulling it out into these different canes. And then maybe that night after the cane is cooled, you go home and while you're watching TV, you sort the cane so it's all, in the appropriate sizes and things. And then the next day, you heat up the cane again and you can pick up the cane and blow a vessel with it. And so I would say that a piece like that Lino was making in the film, he could make 4 or 5 of those in a day working. So they might take an hour to 2 hours each. But he pulled cane all day the day before, and he spent 50 years of his life learning how to be that good a glass blower.
Excellent. Now, if you're gonna share your screen again while you're getting back to that presentation, we have another question. In the video, what's happening at the step when the piece is, one second. When the piece is mostly formed, but then put back into the furnace briefly before it's buffed with the pads on the surface?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So when you're blowing glass, the glass is going through, you're working in a transition temperature where the glass is transitioning from being a liquid to a solid. And that happens in a really wide range of temperatures from about, when it comes out of the furnace, it's at almost 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. And when it gets loaded into the oven, where it will cool down overnight, the annealing oven, it's at more like 1000 or less, 900 degrees. So you're operating in this huge range of almost 1000 degrees between maybe 11 or 1200, 1300 degrees and almost 2000 degrees. But as the glass loses temperature and you're working with it, you need to go back to a furnace that doesn't have glass in it, but it's called the glory hole. It's the furnace that just is used to reheat the glass so you can get it back into a more plastic form and shape it with the tools. So one thing that you can't really tell from looking at that video is that each one of those pieces that Lino makes probably requires 30 or 40 trips back to the glory hole from the bench to get enough heat in it to do the next thing. So you're constantly going back and forth between the workbench and the reheating furnace when you make something like this. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure. I can see we're pretty close to being done here, but I've got a little more. What should I do? I could just answer questions, but I'd really like to talk about the 3D printer, but I don't know how strict we need to be.
I think we can let this run long, and just in case people didn't hear, this video will be up on YouTube later as well, and we'll send it out to all the participants in case you want to watch it later or share it with your friends. So we can run long, I think. If anybody does have questions, please feel free to drop them in chat or send them to me, and I'll share them with Peter as we continue.
Yeah, and at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions too. I don't have to get away anytime soon, so. Anyway, I'll keep going and try to speed things up a little bit here. This is Kalin Becker, who I've talked about. I read her quote at the very beginning of the program. And Kalin's just an extraordinary person, artist, and engineer. And she was making glass instruments because she was in the MIT Wind Ensemble back when she was undergrad, which gave me an idea to start a glass band at MIT. And so after talking to people for a few years about this and meeting Evan Ziporin over in the music department and Christine Southworth, we got to meet a guy named Mark Stewart, who played in Bang on a Can with Evan years ago. And this is Mark. Mark was also Paul Simon's musical director and guitarist and baritone sax player for 20 years, while Paul Simon was touring in that latter 20 years of his career. But Mark's real love is he loves music in its many forms for sure, but he loves handmade instruments. So we invited Mark to come and join us from New York. And Mark said to us, but I don't know anything about glass. We said, well, we've got the glass part covered, but you just tell us how to make it sound better. So he would come up with bows and different kinds of things and stroke the instruments and finally coax sound out of them. We spent the first year or two experimenting. These are styrofoam fish boxes and quartz rods that make wonderful xylophones. And spent a lot of time playing in the sandbox until we finally got to a place where we could do some performing. This is a picture of a thing that we did with Evan Ziporin's music marathon and part of the MIT orchestra for the music marathon in, I think it was 2012 or 13, playing with a bunch of other instruments as well. We played Terry Riley's In C, and this is us performing at the MIT Museum where we go every year. In fact, we were scheduled to play there this April, but it didn't happen because we were all quarantining. So the glass band continues on, and we're a little bit sort of in remission right now, but I expect us to come back as soon as we can be social again. That's a drum circle at the MIT Museum. And I don't have any video right now, but I will next time I give a talk. This is a little instrument called the membranophone. And now I want to talk about the last project I wanted to talk about is the 3D printing project that got started in the Glass Lab. Started with this guy here, Mike Stern, who is also a MEC-E major, a Course 2 major, graduated in about 2010, 2011, something like that. And he was a glass blower, involved in the glass classes from his freshman year, so he got to be a very good glass blower. And then started talking about whether it would be possible to make a 3D printer. And we're not talking like glass powder. He wanted to make a hot glass 3D printer that could print molten glass, which has definitely not been done before to my knowledge. And so for a while, we just didn't know what to do with that idea, but eventually Mike found some people in the media lab who he was taking classes with, and he bought himself a little kiln, and he started seeing what would happen when he dripped glass out of the kiln. This was just the very first experiment. Light the kiln, fill it with glass, see what happens. And that's what happened. We got kind of a pile of garbage, but we proved that you can drip glass out of a hole in a kiln. So we knew that much could happen. And then fast forward, it says, this is not exactly a print yet, but this is beginning to organize glass coils as they fall out and do what some scientists call rope coiling phenomenon. coiling on itself and building a little tower and then combining that with a blown piece. But we still weren't printing. We couldn't be calling it printing yet. So Mike started trying to get a sense physically of what kind of controls, what sort of XYZ controls you would need to have in order to move a kiln around and actually produce a faithful print, a print that was faithful to the CAD input, the file, the print file. And this is still not there, but this is Mike getting a sense of, how fast does it need to move and how hot does it need to be? So we had a number of prints along these lines where you can see that there are layers. The glass kind of wants to be printed, but still not figuring out how to print it right. So eventually this team from the Media Lab, and these were people mostly in Neri Oxman's mediated matter group, Chikara Inamura, John Klein, Marcus Kaiser, who's an amazing artist, Georgia Franchine, who came over from Padua in Italy. We're all part of that team. So the secret turned out to be we needed a nozzle. So this thing right here, instead of just a hole at the bottom of the kiln, we had a separate heated nozzle, and the glass would come through the nozzle and always be the same diameter, and we could print very, very close to the print layer, very close to the top of the last layer printing. And that enabled us to really start getting better results. So these were some of the first prints that actually looked like the design files that were the CAD files that were input into the printer. Very close, actually. I mean, it's not like, military grade close, but it's within a few thousandths of an inch. These things were getting much, 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 much closer. And we started learning what the design space was, how slow you could go, what kind of radius you could turn before the machine wouldn't perform anymore. So this is version 2 of the printer that we use to start making much larger prints. So these prints are on the scale of about 300 millimeters by 300 millimeters. So about a foot, roughly a foot by a foot. And then this is 4 prints that have been combined, glued together, cold work so they can be flat and glued together. And some experiments with closed sections so that fluidics could be included in the glass. Neri Oxman had the idea that she wanted to incorporate these into buildings as an architectural feature. These would be bioactive buildings and run liquids through the utilities of the building. That hasn't happened yet, but we wanted to know whether it could be done, and it can, theoretically. And then these are some sections of some towers that we made in Milan, Italy for Design Week in 2016 or 2017. We were invited to Milan to do the pavilion for Lexus car company. So this is what they looked like when they were done in this room. These 3 towers of these 3 different kind of geometries, where I think this one had 6 lobes. No, let's see, 12 going to 6, 8 going to 4, and I think 5 going to 10. So as the piece morphs vertically, 2 lobes become 1. And this is what they looked like with the lights turned out. They all had motion control in them, so the lights moved up and down as well as got dimmer and brighter. So this is what the light caustics look like when they're projected through what's essentially a lens, a pile of lenses printed on top of one another. Produced the most amazing complex set of light caustics. So I think we have the video next. This is a shorter video made in the Media Lab by Neri's group of that project. It's called Glass 2.
And while I'm switching over to this, we do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
For the kiln, for the 3D process, was there a reason that the kiln was moved to do the 3D printing and not the surface on which the glass is being extruded? Was that a design choice?
That's a fantastic question. So It's not the right way to do it, really, but it was the most cost-effective way to do it at first. And if you think about how big the kiln needs to be, if the kiln is what's moving, you can have a small design chamber, a small build chamber. But if the build chamber has, if the kiln is stationary, you need a much, much bigger build chamber. So the low-hanging fruit was to be able to just have the kiln be the thing that moved. And it was a fairly small kiln, but there was a little bit of noise associated with all that movement and not the highest fidelity prints. So in the second version, version 2, the build plate, as you will see in this video, is what's moving and the kiln is stationary. And that allowed for bigger prints and a higher resolution print. So great question.
And then the second question that we have here, what are the differences between the glass that you use normally and candy glass? Have you ever worked with candy glass? Sugar cooked down until it's in a thin, transparent form?
Yeah, I have not, although I know that sometimes people will use candy glass as a way of introducing glass blowers to a molten material. I haven't done it. And I think there's some really significant differences in the way that glass and candy cool. And so I think candy turns from being a liquid to a solid fairly quickly and crystallizes, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. And glass never crystallizes unless you leave it in the wrong temperature range. So glass can be kind of infinitely heated and reheated and blown and reformed. And I think you run into a problem with that eventually with candy. But that's my expertise of candy ends right there. I don't have anything more to say about that.
Well, thank you. We'll get the video started here.
Oh, I wanted to say one last thing, which is a sort of continued answer to that question about why we chose to have the kiln moving in the first version. In the second printer did not fit into the glass lab. It was so large. So that's another reason we couldn't make it that big the first time. That printer lives off campus in North Cambridge at another facility that's much, much larger. So yeah, it's just a much, much bigger machine. So I think in closing, before I take questions, I wanted to tie this back to the MIT student experience and read one more couple of sentences by Kalin Becker that I just find really moving and kind of crystallizes this talk to me and crystallizes what the Glass Lab is here to do for the MIT experience. She wrote, when she was still an undergrad, she wrote this: "Well, I think that several of my mechanical engineering classes at MIT emphasize the importance of creativity. They cannot stand in place of art to develop and exercise a creative mind. As engineers, most of our education is focused on analysis, but I think that the most valuable skill that distinguishes a good engineer is the ability to be creative in their work." So with that, I'm finished, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
And rather than leaving you to sit in silence until questions come in, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of my TAC. This was a really great talk. It was really entertaining for all of us, for sure. A really fun project to work on.
Great. Well, thanks.
Peter, I just want to jump in and say, again, thank you so much on behalf of my TAC. What we've seen this afternoon has been absolutely stunning and visually beautiful and peaceful and meditative, and it's a piece of magic right here this afternoon. So thank you again for sharing everything with us this afternoon.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been my pleasure.
We have a question from Tiffany Inez Melendez, who asks, when do you foresee the Glass Lab opening?
Yeah, well, I think MIT is going to have to tell us when it's okay to open again. I've been thinking a lot about that, and I mean, you all watching the video, you sort of got a live glass blowing demonstration with the Lino video. You can see how team-oriented and how non-socially distanced glass blowing is. And so I've been thinking about ways that we can come back when we're still under some of these protocols having to do with distancing, doing some more kiln-based projects like the kiln casting and fusing and slumping things. And I think that we could definitely do some projects when the students come back. There's some big questions like, when will the students come back? And we don't know the answers to those questions yet. But I've been talking with Professor Seema and with people in the safety office about how we might be able to adapt some of the things we do to come back earlier, so we don't have to wait until we can start blowing glass again. And I hope that's soon.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, another question from David. I assume you had to shut down the furnaces and kilns when you left. Would you describe the process of coming back online when we do get to come back to campus?
Sure. Yeah, we did. We had to shut down the furnace all the way back in February. We did not make it through the spring semester. When we saw that this was going to be a pandemic, we we stopped blowing glass. We stopped the class even before students started blowing, because when you start sharing blowpipes, that's a pretty good vector right there. So we shut down the furnace and everything is off now. To start again, what we're going to have to do is, it takes a long, long time to both turn the furnace off and to turn it back on, because it's made out of materials that are very sensitive to thermal shock. So it takes about a week to bring it back up. So you start off by putting light bulbs, just really high wattage light bulbs, into the furnace to get it to absorb some heat for a while, for a couple days, until it gets kind of toasty warm. And then you can begin to turn a flame on. And then that flame has to candle, we call it candling up. It has to candle up the furnace over a very even, slow ramp period, so it can gradually ease through these different strain points where the material could crack if you go too fast. So if we're careful with that, we can be up within a week of getting permission, and then we're pretty much ready to go.
And what would happen if the glass did crack? Would it present a big problem for production at the end, or would it sort of interrupt the process would it damage the furnace?
Yeah, it damages the furnace. It's a big problem. We've had this happen 2 or 3 times in the almost 30 years I've been at MIT. Usually what happens is there's like a leak in a gas line, and the gas company turns off the gas, and we don't find out about it for a while, and the furnace crashes. And then what happens is that the glass, as the glass cools, it contracts. And as it contracts, it literally pulls the walls, the lining of the furnace in with it, which just completely cracks. And then it's no longer a unified, it's not an integrated container at that point. So you have to turn the furnace off and tear it apart and start over again. That's about 2 or 3 weeks of really hard, dirty work to rebuild it. So now we have all kinds of webcams and devices that call me on my cell phone if it gets below a certain temperature, so that we can know when that's happening and try to run it and save the furnace. So we haven't had a catastrophic, I'm knocking on wood right now, we haven't had a catastrophic loss of a furnace in quite a while, like maybe 7 or 8 years.
What would you say is the most unique piece that the Glass Lab has made?
Oh.
Hard to choose.
Oh yeah, that's really hard to choose. I mean, those projects, I showed those projects like virtual glass and the 3D printer because I'm not aware of anyone doing either one of those things in the world. So I don't think anybody's made a hot glass 3D printer that prints in that fused deposition modeling way at 2000 degrees. Or anybody who's come up with this Kane modeling software program. I think those things would only happen at MIT. And and I'm not sure there's a glass band anywhere either. There probably are some glass bands. This music is so big that I bet there's some more glass bands. But I think of those, the 3D printing project and the software modeling project are unique, I believe.
And how did you get started in blowing glass?
Well, I was a painter and a printmaker. Sometimes when I give my talk, I show my own artwork a little bit more, and I show the paintings and the prints and the things that I made before I transitioned into glass. I basically met somebody who was a glass blower, realized that I could do some of the things that I'd been wanting to do with light in my paintings in glass, and started working in glass about a little over 30 years ago. And came to MIT, just was invited by the former director, Paige Hazelgrove, to come, and she sort of lured me in and said, hey, you want to come help teach glass blowing? I said, well, I don't really know how to blow glass yet. So she said, well, I'll teach you and then you can help me teach. So I came along, and the first thing we did was rebuild a furnace. It was like the ugliest job in the business, is rebuilding a furnace. So after I made it through helping during IAP, February after IAP, we rebuilt a furnace, and then I was at MIT to stay after that.
And when did you study with Lino? You said he had been your teacher.
Yeah, he was my teacher at the Haystack School up in Maine in 2000, in an advanced Venetian-style glassblowing class. And when I met Lino, the whole group, students, we were asked to go around and one by one tell, what we wanted to study from the master. And so everybody said, I want to learn how to make a goblet, or I want to learn how you make this special vase shape. And I knew he was a really good cook. So when it got to me, I said, I want you to show me how to make risotto. And so he sort of laughed at that. And I thought maybe he forgot about it. But a couple of weeks into the session, he came and tapped me on the back and said, you meet me in the kitchen. So we made risotto together, and yep, now I make risotto his way. And I blow glass his way too.
Oh, that's fantastic. Any other questions for anybody before we close down? And just to remind everybody, we will be uploading this talk.
Well, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, this has been really great. Thank you again for coming out, and thanks to everybody watching for coming out too. It's always really good to see our customers again, because we don't get to see you all in person as much as we used to. So I hope everybody's doing well, having a good time, and I hope you'll come to the next MyTech event that we present. And Peter, maybe you'll be there too.
Maybe I'll be there too. I love MyTech.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.
All right. Bye. Thanks.